Before the world called her Twiggy, she was just Leslie, a girl from London with a curious gaze and a face that didn't fit into any known rule. 60s fashion demanded curves, glamour, and classic perfection, but she appeared like a lightning bolt, splitting everything established in two. She had the body of a sigh, eyes as enormous as open questions, and a fragility turned into power. She never set out to destroy anything, yet her mere presence brought an entire era crashing down. The industry wasn't ready. The runways still celebrated voluptuous figures. Studios dreamed of cinematic divas, and designers kept repeating old molds. Then a photograph of her appeared in a hair salon window, and London stopped. She didn't look like any model before her. She didn't pretend to be one, and yet she changed everything. Her face looked as if it had been drawn by a pop artist. Her expression blended innocence with a quiet certainty, as if saying without words, "This is what the future looks like." When she walked in front of a camera for the first time, fashion stopped being an elegant whisper and became a cultural scream. Twiggy didn't just represent an aesthetic, she represented a rupture. She embodied youth revolution, soft rebellion, a kind of beauty no one had imagined possible. She turned thinness into a symbol, eyeliner into a language, and minimalism into a manifesto. In just a few months, she went from being a teenager working in a boutique to becoming the most recognized face on the planet. And behind that immediate impact remained the question that still echoes. Was Twiggy the woman who changed the history of world fashion? Or was fashion forced to rebuild itself to follow her? London in the 60s was on the verge of exploding into color, sound, and rebellion. But when Leslie Lawson was born, no one imagined that this shy, slender, quiet girl would become the most unexpected spark of the aesthetic revolution that would reshape the century. She grew up in a humble neighborhood in the west of the city. Surrounded by red buses, small shops, and magazines, she flipped through as if they were windows into distant worlds. In those years, the ideal of beauty was still clinging to the glamorous curves of cinema divas. Nothing in that canon seemed prepared for someone so delicate, with the figure of a light shadow and eyes so large they seemed to hold a permanent secret. Leslie never felt part of that mold. She was the skinny girl at school, the one who slipped unnoticed among classmates, trying to imitate Bardot or dreaming of Hollywood glamour. Yet inside her lived a particular sensitivity. She observed everything with the kind of attention that only appears in those who carry a power they have not yet discovered. Her parents supported her in a simple, warm way, proud of a daughter whose fragile presence hid a quiet strength. The decisive turning point arrived on an ordinary day, in a place never meant to make history. A London hair salon. Leonard Lewis, the stylist most sought after by young women who wanted to look modern, saw in Leslie something fashion still did not know how to name. It wasn't just her geometric face or her very thin body. It was a different vibration, a soft but steady energy that pointed toward a new future. Leonard transformed her with a bold, almost futuristic pixie cut that revealed every angle of her face as if it were modern art. Then came the photographs, with her hand-painted lashes, her lined eyes, and that expression suspended between innocence and defiance. Leslie's image became a cultural magnet even before the public knew her name. When those photos appeared in the shop window, London simply stopped. She looked like no one else. She followed no trend. It was as if the decade had suddenly found its own symbol without even searching for it. Young people recognized in that image a new possible identity. Adults, bewildered, didn't know whether to criticize her or admire her. What was undeniable was that the voluptuous aesthetic that had ruled for years began to crack at that very instant. The transition from Leslie to Twiggy was so fast, it felt dreamlike. Within weeks, magazines, Photographers and designers started calling her. They wanted to understand that presence that challenged everything established without saying a single word. Every shoot reaffirmed the same truth. Twiggy didn't just pose. She told stories. Her fragility became luminous strength in front of the camera. Her light body, so criticized by some, became a symbol of youthful freedom. Her exaggeratedly lined eyes created an aesthetic language that London girls immediately began to imitate. She was the visible embodiment of a silent revolution. Youth demanded space, identity, a break with the past. Twiggy became the perfect face for that cultural call. She didn't represent luxury or mature sophistication. She represented freshness, irreverence, risk. She represented change. The city that once overlooked her began to see her reflected in shop windows, magazine covers, and billboards. Without intending to, Leslie was giving shape to the decade. And even so, behind the global phenomenon, there remained the teenager astonished each time she saw herself printed in a magazine. She never imagined any of this. She didn't seek fame. She didn't plan to become an icon. But fashion, always restless, always searching for a new face to reinterpret it, found in her its most unexpected renewal. Twiggy didn't enter fashion to adapt to it. Fashion had to adapt to her. When Twiggy appeared for the first time on a major cover, the industry understood it was witnessing something far more powerful than a fleeting trend. It was the eruption of a new visual language. Her figure looked as if it had been drawn by a pop artist, light, geometric, carrying an almost childlike elegance that dismantled every convention. At a time when models were glamorous, mature, sophisticated women, she arrived like a lightning bolt that illuminated an entirely different aesthetic. Magazines wasted no time in giving her the nickname that would become eternal. Twiggy, the little twig, the young woman who would redefine forever what it meant to be a model. Her rise was immediate. In a matter of months, she went from being an unknown London girl to becoming the face of swinging London, a city reinventing itself, and now with the perfect icon to embody its spirit. Photographers lined up to work with her. Each one wanted to capture that magnetism that seemed to have no explanation. With a single glance, Twiggy transmitted vulnerability, mystery, and determination. With a simple tilt of her head, she turned the minimal into the memorable. Fashion, which had always spoken in elegant whispers, suddenly shouted the arrival of a new era. Designers found in her the ideal image to express the modernity they were seeking. Her straight, almost androgynous figure wasn't a lack. It was a manifesto. It transmitted the freedom of a generation that rejected the molds of the past and demanded space of its own. Twiggy embodied that identity that blended irreverence with tenderness, boldness with lightness. The trips began to multiply. Paris, New York, Milan. In every city she stepped into, the fashion world seemed to accelerate as if her presence triggered a collective creative impulse. Fashion houses fought for her image, wanting to dress her, photograph her, turn her into the synonym of the new. Meanwhile, the public imitated her. Young women drew eyeliner to enlarge their eyes like hers, sought short hairstyles, minimalist clothing, geometric dresses. Twiggy became a cultural force that transcended fashion to invade music, advertising, television, and even film. But behind that media explosion was a 17-year-old girl trying to understand the magnitude of what she was living. Her initial shyness blended with an unexpected responsibility. She knew everyone was watching her. She knew she had become the image of a generational shift. And even so, she maintained an authenticity that made every appearance feel as natural as it was surprising. She never tried to be a star. She simply was herself, and the world decided that was enough to break a paradigm. In New York, they received her as a cultural phenomenon. The press called her the face of the future. The most prestigious photographers competed for an hour with her. Andy Warhol, fascinated by her aesthetic, considered her a living work of the pop movement. Twiggy seemed to move among those expectations with an almost enigmatic calm. She raised her gaze, posed, barely smiled, and without intending to, created images that would mark the visual history of the 20th century. Her figure, so criticized at first for being extremely thin, ended up imposing a new aesthetic canon. It was a total rupture. Fashion stopped chasing only adult sophistication and opened its doors to youth as a creative force. With Twiggy, adolescence ceased to be a transition and became an identity. The era of teenage supermodels began with her, though no one knew it yet. Her style was more than fashion. It was language. A-line dresses, vibrant prints, tall boots, exaggerated lashes, minimal makeup on the face, but theatrical on the eyes. Everything she wore became a trend, and each trend seemed to speak the spirit of the 60s. A decade-breathing rupture, experimentation, and freedom. As the world celebrated her, Twiggy also began to discover her personal strength. She learned to move among flashes and interviews with natural ease. Understood, she possessed a magnetism that went beyond the physical. Her face communicated stories even before she could verbalize them. Designers saw her as a muse, photographers as a mystery, and the public as a revolution-made person. Twiggy had become a legend before even turning 20, and the question was already circling in everyone's mind. How far could a young woman go after reinventing, without ever planning it, the way the world looked at beauty? The world quickly understood that Twiggy was not just a new face, she was a phenomenon. Her image spread with unprecedented speed, as if the entire decade had been waiting for that silhouette, that immense gaze, that energy capable of redefining visual culture. On the covers of Vogue, Elle, Harper's Bazaar, and every magazine that set trends, Twiggy appeared not as a guest, but as a protagonist. In every one of those images, there was a clear message. Fashion had entered a new era, and she was its new language. London had become the epicenter of creative youth, and Twiggy embodied that spirit with an almost mystical fidelity. While the adult world tried to understand the accelerated transformation society was experiencing, she became the perfect ambassador of that modernism that rejected rigidity and embraced spontaneity. Her light body, her curious gaze, her bold yet gentle style created an aesthetic ideal impossible to ignore. Adolescence was no longer an in-between stage. Now it was a complete stage, a universe of its own. Twiggy personified it with absolute naturalness. One of the most revolutionary aspects of her figure was the way she transformed the concept of femininity. Her androgynous appearance did not erase delicacy. It redefined it. She showed that feminine identity could be multiple, soft and strong at the same time, floating between innocence and rebellion without needing to explain itself. She represented a beauty that no longer sought to please, but to express. That message resonated deeply with a generation demanding freedom over their bodies, their clothing, and their ways of existing. The most influential designers of the time found in Twiggy an incomparable muse. Mary Quant, considered the mother of the miniskirt, saw in her the perfect embodiment of the revolution she had been pushing from her atelier. The miniskirt was never fully understood until it moved over Twiggy's light legs, which seemed to walk as a manifesto in favor of youth freedom. Other British and European designers joined this momentum. Their collections became bolder, more geometric, more vibrant, as if Twiggy's presence alone pushed them to explore new frontiers. Cultural impact did not stop at the runways. On television, Twiggy appeared on programs where her presence filled the screen without needing many words. Just a turn of her face was enough for the audience to understand they were witnessing an aesthetic that, far from trying to impress, radiated freshness. In music, her style influenced artists and bands, searching for visual counterparts to the pop sound of the decade. Even in advertising, brands began abandoning classic glamour to adopt a more youthful, experimental style inspired by her. In the United States, her figure sparked unprecedented enthusiasm. The media proclaimed her the face of the year. Young American women wanted her haircut, her makeup, her A-line dresses, her way of looking. Twiggy became a global phenomenon that crossed continents and cultures with surprising ease. It was as if fashion had found in her a bridge between the present and the future. But behind that worldwide expansion existed a deep emotional struggle. Twiggy learned to navigate pressure, expectations, and the sudden fame surrounding her. Even though her face appeared everywhere, she preserved a very human essence. She was only 17, 18 years old. She carried the weight of being considered the aesthetic voice of an entire generation. And still, she never lost the spontaneity that made her unique. She didn't allow the industry to mold her. Somehow, she remained faithful to the girl she had been in that modest London neighborhood. Her authenticity was, paradoxically, the most revolutionary part of her figure. While fashion constructed its own myths, Twiggy stayed close, real, almost surprised by everything happening around her. She didn't perform a character. She was herself. And that, in a world obsessed with perfection, carried immense transformative power. The decade advanced quickly, and in every corner of the planet, girls experimented with new ways of doing their makeup, dressing, walking, inspired by those images in which Twiggy seemed to command time. She achieved something that few figures in fashion history can claim, not simply following a trend, but creating a before and an after. Twiggy was no longer just a model. She was a cultural symbol, a silent voice speaking through aesthetics and defining an entire generation without needing a single speech. As Twiggy solidified herself as the undeniable face of the 60s, questions, criticisms, and tensions began to rise around her, the kind that always emerge when someone breaks a paradigm. Her extremely thin figure, which at first had been celebrated as a fresh rupture from previous beauty standards, began generating controversy in conservative sectors. Some critics feared that her image promoted an unrealistic ideal, while others, especially the younger generation, defended her as an emblem of freedom and authenticity. The debate grew with the same speed with which her fame multiplied. Twiggy, barely stepping into adulthood, observed that debate with the calm of someone who never sought to create conflict. Her thinness was not the result of aesthetic obsession, but a natural characteristic. Even so, media pressure began to surround her, forcing her to reflect on the role she played without intending to. It was difficult for an 18-year-old girl to carry the symbolic weight of an entire generation, but Twiggy learned to turn that responsibility into a form of awareness. She never denied her appearance, but she never glorified it either. She stated simply that her body was just that, her body. And although society argued around her, she remained the same young woman who found strength in her authenticity. This duality between admiration and criticism revealed a deeper phenomenon. Twiggy had arrived at a moment when fashion was colliding directly with cultural politics. It was not just clothing, it was identity. It was discourse. It was a clash between the old and the new. Her image became a territory where issues of female freedom, bodily autonomy, youth, and the breaking of patterns were debated. Although she never intended to be an activist, her mere existence questioned the traditional role of women in the industry. And in that sense, she opened paths for future generations who saw in her an example of gentle but effective resistance. Another unexpected aspect of her rise was the speed with which the market tried to appropriate her aesthetic. Suddenly, products, advertisements and campaigns were replicating the Twiggy style without truly understanding its essence. Short dresses, exaggerated makeup, straight hair, knee-high boots. Everything was repeated like a formula, attempting to capture the magnetism she projected so effortlessly. But what many imitators failed to understand was that Twiggy's power didn't lie in the visual elements themselves, but in the natural way she carried them. It wasn't a costume or a commercial strategy. It was a genuine expression that came from her own identity. Meanwhile, Twiggy began to feel the demands of a career marked by constant travel, endless sessions, and a level of public exposure that could become overwhelming. At times, between shoots, she wondered if she truly belonged in a world that seemed to devour everything around it. There were days when fame made her feel distant from the simple life she remembered in London. Yet in front of the camera, she found refuge. There, everything made sense. The lens watched her without judgment, without noise. She returned the gaze with that blend of vulnerability and confidence that had captivated the world. During this stage of her life, Twiggy began exploring new forms of expression. She didn't want to limit herself to the role of a model. A growing restlessness lived inside her, a desire to try something beyond photography. She became interested in acting, music, television. She wanted to expand her world and prove that her talent wasn't confined to a pose. This transition was met with skepticism by some critics who doubted she could transcend fashion. But Twiggy, true to her spirit, moved forward without fear. She knew reinvention was an essential part of her identity. The controversies, far from weakening her, strengthened her. She understood that being a symbol meant facing opposing opinions. She understood that her image had acquired a dimension that belonged both to her and to the public. And she accepted that duality without abandoning her essence. Her figure had already redefined an aesthetic canon. Now she was beginning to redefine what it meant to be a young woman in the industry, showing the world that fashion could be a vehicle of personal freedom even when it tried to impose new molds. Twiggy kept moving forward, discovering her own boundaries, determined not to become a prisoner of her own myth. When the frantic rhythm of her modeling career began to stabilize, Twiggy felt it was time to explore new territories. Fashion had given her fame, influence, and an unexpected voice. But she sensed that her path was not meant to end in front of a still camera. There was a wider world waiting for her, and true to her restless spirit, she decided to venture into it. Her transition into film and entertainment was not an impulsive whim, but an inner need for growth, a search for identity she could not find solely on the runways. Actor and director Ken Russell was one of the first people to see in her a talent that went beyond her iconic image. When he chose her for the musical The Boyfriend in 1971, many critics reacted with surprise. Some celebrated it as a bold move. Others suspected Twiggy would not be able to carry a character on screen because they saw her only as a visual phenomenon. But Russell trusted his intuition, and she trusted that opportunity as if it were a new beginning. From the first day on set, something shifted inside Twiggy. She realized that acting allowed her to express emotions that in photography could only be suggested, but never fully revealed. Here she could speak, sing, move, create a character, build a story. It was a new language, but also a liberation. As the cameras rolled, Twiggy discovered a voice that had been waiting for years to emerge, and that voice resonated with force. Her performance earned her 2 Golden Globes, cementing her place in cinema in a way few expected. The success of The Boyfriend marked a before and after. Twiggy was no longer just a fashion icon, she was now a multidisciplinary artist. She began exploring more complex roles, both in film and television, proving her talent was far from superficial. Her natural charisma, that blend of innocence and maturity, worked on screen with a captivating authenticity. Directors valued her discipline, her sensitivity, and her ability to combine vulnerability with determination. Each project brought her closer to the woman she wanted to become. As she built this new stage of her career, Twiggy also discovered her passion for music. Her soft, clear voice, filled with a subtle melancholy that wrapped itself around every note, won over a different audience from the one that had followed her in fashion. She recorded albums, performed live, and appeared in music programs. People began to see her not as a model singing out of curiosity, but as a genuine artist with something special to share. Music gave her an intimate space where she could connect from a more emotional, deeper place, closer to her true self. But this transformation was not free of challenges. The industry is always critical of those who try to break the labels imposed on them. Some watched her with skepticism, waiting for her career to dissolve outside of fashion. Yet Twiggy never allowed that noise to derail her. She had learned over the years that authenticity was her strength, that her value did not lie solely in her image, but in her ability to reinvent herself without betraying who she was. And so she continued, moving between projects, discovering new facets, building a trajectory that refused to be reduced to a single decade or discipline. Meanwhile, her influence on fashion did not disappear. Even off the runways, she continued inspiring young designers who saw in her living proof that beauty could exist in multiplicity. Her presence in popular culture kept growing. Every appearance, every interview, every project carried the same quiet message: the power of a woman who dares to redefine herself. Twiggy had transcended her own myth. She had left behind the static image of the icon to become a creator in constant evolution. And in that process, she proved that the true revolution was not only changing fashion, but demonstrating that a woman can rebuild herself endlessly without losing her essence. As Twiggy moved through adulthood, she began to reconcile all the versions of herself that the world had built around her. There was the shy London girl, the teenager who revolutionized fashion without meaning to, the artist reborn in film and music, and finally, the woman searching for balance between fame and peace. Among all those faces, Twiggy learned to listen to the most important voice, her own, the one that for years had been overshadowed by flashes, covers, headlines, and expectations imposed by others. Her evolution was not sudden, but a long process, filled with discoveries and moments of clarity. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Twiggy became a bridge between generations. For those who had lived through the 60s, she remained the symbol of youthful revolution. For newer audiences, however, she represented something more intimate, a woman who had survived the weight of myth without losing her humanity. Her presence on television programs, interviews, and modern campaigns revealed a luminous maturity, a serenity that only appears after facing the pressure of being seen as a global icon. Twiggy began speaking more openly about her life, her insecurities, her doubts, her lessons learned. She did so with an honesty that surprised many. There was no resentment, no bitter nostalgia. There was gratitude, even for the difficult moments. She spoke of her natural thinness, the criticism she faced, the unexpected responsibility of being seen as a role model for millions of young girls. She explained that she never wanted to dictate a standard, that her body was simply her body, and that true freedom in fashion should lie in accepting diversity, not in imposing new molds. That message turned her into an even more respected figure. In an industry that often perpetuates insecurities, Twiggy represented a different approach, kinder, more human. She understood the cultural impact she had made, but also understood that fashion needed to evolve toward a more inclusive vision. Through interviews and public appearances, she began speaking about the importance of health, emotional well-being, and authenticity. Without meaning to, she found herself leading a global conversation once again, this time from a place of maturity. At the same time, her personal life took center stage. Twiggy found in her family and close relationships the balance that the fashion world rarely offers. Her marriage to actor Michael Whitney and later to director Lee Lawson allowed her to build a home where fame was not the protagonist. Her daughter Carly became one of the most important pillars of her life. Twiggy spoke about motherhood with a different glow, as if that role had revealed a kind of meaning professional success could never match. In her home, she discovered a kind of joy no cover or award could provide. Despite her quieter life, Twiggy never stepped fully away from creativity. She appeared in audiovisual campaigns, fashion projects, artistic collaborations, television programs, and theater productions. She had nothing to prove. She simply enjoyed art as a space of freedom. Her style, though more mature, remained true to her essence. Minimalist, clean, filled with freshness. It was as if the girl from the 60s still lived within her, now transformed into a woman who walked with the calm only experience can give. As the years passed, Twiggy began being honored not only as a fashion icon, but as one of the most influential cultural figures of the 20th century. Entire trends were born because she existed. She changed the global perception of feminine beauty, helped dismantle age prejudice within the industry, opened doors for young and unconventional models, pushed aesthetics rooted in authenticity, and proved that reinvention is a legitimate and powerful form of freedom. What is most remarkable is that she never sought to be a legend. The legend came for her, and Twiggy accepted it not as a crown, but as a responsibility she fulfilled with grace, humility, and an honesty that turned her into something deeper than a myth, the living embodiment of how a woman can influence the world without losing her essence. Twiggy was no longer just the girl with the enormous eyes. She was the woman who learned to live beyond the mirror, beyond the character, beyond the icon. When one examines from a distance the impact Twiggy left on fashion, it becomes impossible to reduce it to a simple shift in body type or a passing trend. What she did was far deeper. She rewrote the visual language of an industry that had spent decades anchored in the same molds. Her arrival not only shattered an aesthetic, it introduced an entirely new way of seeing, feeling, and consuming fashion. Twiggy became a mirror in which the youth of the world recognized itself, and consequently, a starting point for designers to reimagine what a model could be. Before Twiggy, fashion was dominated by voluptuous silhouettes and gazes loaded with classic glamour. After Twiggy, the industry understood that beauty could be light, fresh, linear, almost ethereal. No one had believed that such a thin body could sustain global campaigns, inspire aesthetic movements, or become the center of cultural conversation. But Twiggy transformed that perception with a disarming naturalness. She showed that fashion could speak from innocence and irreverence, from simplicity and boldness at the same time. One of the most significant legacies she left was opening the door to an androgynous aesthetic that had begun sprouting in the 60s, but had never found a face to legitimize it. Twiggy did not embody traditional femininity, but she did not reject it either. Her image moved in an intermediate, entirely new territory, where visual genders blended to create something more modern. This fusion was embraced by designers eager to break barriers, from Mary Quant's geometric cuts to the conceptual propositions that would dominate the 70s and 80s. Twiggy not only inspired them, she gave them permission to experiment without fear. Another central aspect of her legacy is that she turned youth into a serious aesthetic force. Before her, young models were seen as complements to adult women, never as protagonists. Twiggy changed that hierarchy. With every cover she graced, she reminded the industry that youth also had a voice, a style, an energy, and an imagination of its own. The boom of teenage supermodels that would dominate later decades was born directly from the impact she left. Without Twiggy, icons like Kate Moss, Gemma Ward, or even today's models exploring fragility, minimalism, and soft rebellion might not have emerged in the same way. The swinging aesthetic of London in the 60s also found in Twiggy its most powerful face. With her A-line dresses, iconic miniskirts, tall boots, and exaggerated lashes, she became a global symbol that transcended her country. She didn't just represent British culture, she exported it to the world. Her image influenced how millions of young people dressed, and also how designers structured their collections. She popularized a freer, less rigid femininity, one in which the body did not need to justify its shape, and in which fashion obsessed with glamour gave way to fashion obsessed with freedom. Fashion photography also changed because of her. Photographers began exploring new angles, new attitudes, new narratives. Her face allowed play with shadows, geometry, and compositions that previously had no place. Twiggy turned fragility into aesthetic, light into character, and gaze into manifesto. Her presence opened visual possibilities that redefined editorial photography for decades. Even the commercial limits of fashion shifted. With the explosive demand she generated, Twiggy proved that an icon can build a parallel industry. Makeup lines inspired by her look, massive campaigns, brand collaborations, entire movements in retail chains. What we now understand as an aesthetic reproducible on a massive scale was born in large part thanks to her. Twiggy was one of the first figures to turn her image into a sellable, recognizable, and aspirational language worldwide. But perhaps her most powerful legacy is that she proved a woman can change fashion without intending to, without seeking the spotlight, without following a calculated plan. She changed it by being herself. Her authenticity, that blend of shyness and boldness, continues to inspire those who want to break molds, but fear they don't fit what the industry expects. Twiggy taught them that not only is it valid to be different, that difference can become strength. And so, decade after decade, Twiggy has remained an eternal reference, an icon that never ages because she never represented a specific era, but a way of approaching life, daring to exist outside the mold so the world inevitably must adapt. As time passed, Twiggy's figure ceased to be only an aesthetic icon and transformed into an emotional reference point, a cultural support for all the women who grew up in a world where fashion seemed to impose more rules than freedoms. Her image, reproduced millions of times, did not merely inspire trends. It also opened space for necessary conversations that previously did not even exist. Each generation found something different in her: a mirror, a challenge, a memory, a promise. That made her something deeper than a myth of the 60s. It made her a symbol that travels through decades without losing meaning. For the women of her era, Twiggy represented the freedom to break away from conventional femininity. She was living proof that beauty did not have to justify itself through a single model. Her body, so criticized by some conservative sectors, became an unexpected flag for those who felt they never fit dominant standards. She showed them that fashion could open up and that they had the right to exist without asking permission. Her enormous eyes, lined as if they were a doorway into a new world, became a reminder that an entire generation was ready to claim spaces that once had been forbidden. For the generations that followed, Twiggy offered another kind of teaching: the importance of authenticity in a world increasingly obsessed with image. When the fashion industry began tightening its expectations, when visual perfectionism became almost a requirement, Twiggy emerged as a reminder that it had not always been that way. Her success was not born from artificial fabrication or multi-million-dollar strategies. It was born from spontaneity, from chance, from the way her face captured the spirit of a decade without her seeking it. In a modern world filled with filters, surgeries, and controlled narratives, Twiggy symbolizes the beauty that comes from accepting who you truly are. Her influence was also felt within the feminist movement, even though she never proclaimed herself an activist. Twiggy embodied a silent freedom, a form of soft, yet forceful resistance. She demonstrated that women could take center stage without needing to fit into what society expected of them. She opened space for conversations about identity, autonomy, diversity, and emotional health, conversations that are essential today but were nearly impossible in the 60s. In that sense, her legacy does not belong only to fashion. It belongs to all women who fight to find an authentic place in a world full of external pressures. On an aesthetic level, her style remains alive in ways that surprise even those who do not know her story. The exaggerated lashes, the pixie cuts, the minimalist dresses, the straight silhouette, the graphic makeup. All these elements return again and again in contemporary trends, as if fashion were unable to detach itself from the language she helped invent. Every generation of designers has a moment in their career when they find themselves, consciously or not, in dialogue with Twiggy's image. That shows the depth of her impact. It is not nostalgia, it is DNA. On social media, new generations continue to recreate her look without even knowing they are honoring her. Influencers, young models, and fashion lovers replicate her aesthetic, reinterpret it, modernize it. And always, even without naming it, there is something of Twiggy in those gestures. Because her aesthetic contribution was not a trend, it was a visual structure that continues guiding fashion from within. But perhaps the most moving part of her legacy is her humanity. Twiggy never presented herself as a perfect product. She was always accessible, honest, able to speak with humility about her insecurities and her triumphs. For many women, that fragility turned into strength is a silent guide, a lighthouse that shows you do not need to shout to leave a profound mark. Twiggy changed fashion, yes, but she also changed the emotional relationship millions of women have with the mirror. Her legacy is eternal because it does not depend on era, but on meaning. And that meaning, generation after generation, remains the same. Being different is not a flaw, it is a path, and Twiggy was and continues to be the woman who opened that path. As the years passed, and many iconic figures became trapped in nostalgia, Twiggy did something few dared to attempt. She reinvented herself without ever ceasing to be herself. Her story did not remain anchored in the 60s, nor in the legendary covers, nor in the myth of the girl who changed fashion with a single glance. Twiggy chose to move forward, to adapt, to transform. And she did it with such elegant naturalness that the public barely noticed the transition. One day, she was the most influential model on the planet. Another day, she was an actress. Another, a presenter. Another, an artist. And in every one of those roles, her essence remained intact. This ability to transform without losing herself became one of the most admired parts of her legacy. Twiggy never allowed her image to become a prison. While the world continued repeating her iconic photograph with painted lashes, she kept moving forward, curious and free. On television, she became a bright, warm, spontaneous personality. Her presence filled the screen not because of glamour, but because of authentic charisma. She had left behind adolescent fragility and become a confident woman with a clear voice and well-formed opinions. During these years, Twiggy also became a key figure in the cultural conversation about aging. In a world obsessed with eternal youth, her presence demonstrated that a woman can remain relevant, influential, and profoundly stylish without hiding her age. Her mature elegance, her lucid interviews, and her serene way of facing time sent an essential message. Beauty is not a moment, it is an attitude. And Twiggy embodied it like very few. Her return to fashion as ambassador for contemporary brands was welcomed with enthusiasm. New generations didn't know her as the 60s supermodel, but as a woman who radiated style from maturity. Her presence in modern campaigns celebrated age diversity and showed that fashion could expand beyond its traditional limits. Twiggy became part of a new wave of models who represented authenticity instead of perfection, history instead of empty youth. This return was not an act of nostalgia, it was an act of coherence. The industry, which had changed so much since the 60s, encountered the same aesthetic force that had helped create it. Twiggy did not imitate her former image, nor did she try to revive the myth. She appeared as a complete woman, with all her experience, her sensitivity, and her personal style. Her elegance no longer depended on exaggerated eyeliner or a teenage silhouette, but on a luminous maturity that proved fashion can accompany every stage of life without fearing evolution. Throughout this stage, Twiggy also allowed herself to explore a more introspective side. She began writing, reflecting on her life, looking back without becoming trapped in memory. In her memoirs, interviews, and public conversations, she revealed a deep honesty. She spoke of the pressure she felt when young, the impact of criticism, the loneliness that sometimes accompanied fame. But she also spoke of gratitude for the opportunities, of affection for those who supported her, and of the love for a life that never stopped surprising her. Her presence in documentaries, cultural events, and global tributes confirmed her as a living legend. Not a legend frozen in the past, but one that keeps moving, breathing, speaking. A woman whose influence goes beyond aesthetics and becomes philosophy. Twiggy taught that fashion is not only about clothing, but about freedom, identity, and spirit. For younger generations, Twiggy is no longer only the girl with enormous eyes in black and white. She is a reminder that one can grow without losing brightness, reinvent oneself without fear, change without betrayal. She is proof that a true icon does not fade, it evolves. Today, Twiggy lives with the serenity of someone who knows she left a mark impossible to erase. She did it with softness, with innocence, with a strength that was never aggressive, and an authenticity that never needed justification. Her relevance is not a miracle, but the consequence of a life lived in truth. Twiggy not only changed the history of fashion, she changed the way we understand what it means to be oneself in a world that is always trying to mold us. With the arrival of the 21st century, Twiggy reappeared not as a relic of the past, but as a fully relevant presence. As the world of fashion entered the digital era, with social networks, influencers, and increasingly accelerated production rhythms, her figure regained importance. Not out of nostalgia, but because her essence aligned perfectly with the search of a new generation that valued authenticity over artifice. Twiggy was, without intending to be, the aesthetic godmother of an era obsessed with recovering a lost naturalness. The minimalism she represented in the 60s returned with force to the runways. Young designers revived straight lines, clean silhouettes, androgynous aesthetics, pixie cuts, and graphic makeup. In every one of these trends, there was an evident, though not always acknowledged, trace. Twiggy was still speaking, but now through thousands of reinterpretations. In contemporary editorials, young models recreated her poses, her gazes, her contrasts between fragility and strength. The aesthetic she helped create was not past, it was present. Social media also played a key role in this second public life. Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest filled with tutorials inspired by her iconic makeup. Young people from different countries analyzed how to achieve her drawn-on lashes, her light shadow, her open look. Many of them didn't even know who Twiggy originally was, but they sensed they were imitating someone who had marked a before and after in visual history. Every repetition, every accidental tribute, reaffirmed the relevance of a style that seemed built to survive any era. Twiggy, far from resisting this renewal, embraced it with enthusiasm. She participated in campaigns for modern brands, posed in contemporary photographs with the mature elegance that defined her, and became an ambassador for movements celebrating diversity in fashion. In interviews, she spoke lucidly about the importance of accepting age, of not fearing the passage of time, of staying true to oneself. Her message resonated especially with older women, who saw her as a reference of eternal elegance without needing to hide her history. On television programs and in documentaries, Twiggy shared reflections that revealed the depth of her character. She spoke of success, but also of the invisible challenges: pressure, media exposure, the responsibility of being considered a model for millions. She did so without victimhood, without dramatics, with a transparency that moved people. Her voice had become more important than her image. Her story inspired far beyond fashion. It touched the everyday lives of those seeking an example of resilience and authenticity. Twiggy's collaborations with contemporary brands also marked a new chapter. She participated in collections that celebrated retro aesthetics and in campaigns that sought to reinterpret British elegance from a modern perspective. Her presence conveyed a serene, mature beauty, with a glow that did not depend on remembering her past, but on inhabiting her present fully. In all these appearances, the industry implicitly acknowledged something already evident. Twiggy was not a trend, she was a foundation. Meanwhile, popular culture revived her story again and again. Documentaries, photographic exhibitions, fashion books, and analyses of 20th century aesthetics kept her alive as an essential reference. Even Generation Z, born decades after her debut, found in her a source of inspiration. They were drawn to her authenticity, her free spirit, her ability to break patterns without violence. She was a modern figure in a body from the past. And precisely because of that, her relevance seemed to grow over time instead of fading. On an emotional level, Twiggy remained the gentle voice in an industry that often feels hostile. Her message, repeated in interviews, on social media, and in public appearances, was always the same. That style is born from inner truth, not outer imitation. That beauty is a form of freedom, and that no one should sacrifice their essence to fit someone else's expectations. That message, simple and radical at once, resonated powerfully in a generation saturated with filters, algorithms, and aesthetic pressure. Twiggy did not merely survive her own myth, she surpassed it. She expanded it. She turned it into a way of life where time does not subtract, but adds. Today, in the 21st century, her name is still written with the same force as 6 decades ago, reminding us that fashion changes, but the attitude behind it can be eternal. As she reached the final stretch of her journey, Twiggy could no longer be described solely as a model, actress, singer, or television personality. Her figure had become something much broader, much deeper. She was a cultural spirit that had crossed generations and continued to inspire without needing to impose itself. Each decade found a different version of her, a new interpretation, a renewed dialogue with her image and her legacy. And that is what distinguishes true myths. They do not remain frozen. They evolve with those who look at them. In the history of fashion, Twiggy occupies a place that few figures can claim, not because she was perfect, nor because she dominated the industry for decades, but because she changed the course of global aesthetics at a moment when youth needed a visual voice to represent it. Her arrival was a rupture in time, a reminder that beauty is a living language, and that sometimes one unexpected face is enough for an entire system to reinvent itself. Many models have been successful. Very few have been transformative. Twiggy belonged to that select group that redefines what is possible. What is striking is that her impact did not remain trapped in the 60s. As culture evolved, her message evolved as well. The adult Twiggy began to represent the idea that reinvention is a form of courage, that growing and changing does not mean abandoning who we were, but integrating new versions of ourselves. Her mature presence taught an industry obsessed with youth that elegance has no expiration date. Women found in her a refuge, a tangible proof that shining through time is possible. Her face, turned into a global symbol, also became a pedagogical resource. In design schools, photography academies, and specialized programs, her expression, her posture, her ability to convey more with a single glance than many models with elaborate poses is analyzed. Twiggy was not theatrical. She was essential. That quality made her eternal, because what is essential never goes out of style. Contemporary brands, aware of the emotional value of her figure, continued inviting her to campaigns that celebrated age diversity. Twiggy appeared not as a nod to the past, but as an affirmation of the present. Her adult elegance moved through magazines, billboards, and digital platforms with the same force with which 11,000 covers had captured her youth. It was not nostalgia. It was continuity. Beyond fashion, Twiggy also left a quiet mark on how people understand individual freedom. Her story, from the shy girl in a London neighborhood to the woman who reinvented herself multiple times, became a powerful metaphor. In a world constantly trying to define us, she showed that one can escape the mold, create one's own space, and exist from authenticity. She did not need scandals or provocations to challenge entire systems. She did it from stillness, from fragility transformed into strength, from innocence turned into manifesto. In every tribute, in every interview remembering her impact, in every photographic exhibition where her image comes alive again, the same truth is reaffirmed. Twiggy did not disappear. She integrated herself into cultural DNA. She lives in contemporary editorials, in the graphic makeup of modern runways, in the minimalist aesthetic that continues to dominate, in the freedom young models feel to be different, in the way women of all ages reconcile with their reflection. And perhaps her greatest contribution is not aesthetic, but emotional. Twiggy taught that it is not necessary to fit in to belong, that value does not lie in conformity, but in individuality, that every person carries their own kind of beauty, and that this beauty can change lives if expressed with honesty. Today, while her name continues to illuminate conversations about fashion, art, and culture, Twiggy remains a constant light in a universe that changes rapidly. She not only changed the history of global fashion, she changed the way we understand identity, freedom, and the infinite capacity to reinvent ourselves. That is the power of a legend. That is the legacy of Twiggy. When one looks at the history of fashion through a wide lens, many names appear, many trends, many faces that defined a moment and then faded. But Twiggy does not belong to that category. Her presence continues breathing within contemporary culture because her impact was never superficial. It was deep, emotional, generational. She didn't change a garment. She changed a mindset. She didn't transform just an aesthetic. She transformed the way the world understood beauty, youth, and authenticity. From that first photograph taken in a London hair salon, Twiggy embodied a revolution without violence. She showed that originality can be more powerful than perfection, that a subtle gesture can move more than a loud trend, that a different face can become a symbol of collective freedom. Her enormous gaze, lined as if she wished to see beyond the present, became the image the world needed to enter a new era. With her, youth stopped being a shadow behind adult glamour and stepped into the center of the stage. Fashion became lighter, bolder, more honest. Entire generations found in Twiggy a refuge where difference was celebrated instead of corrected. And when her modeling career shifted toward film, music, and television, Twiggy proved that creativity is not an outfit worn only once, but a path that can take countless forms. Her ability to reinvent herself with elegance and truth made her a permanent reference, not just for the industry, but for anyone searching to live authentically. Today, in a world saturated with perfect images and filtered lives, she remains an essential reminder, proof that real beauty is born from individuality, naturalness, and sincerity. Twiggy did not seek to be an icon, but she was one. She did not seek to become a legend, but she became one. Her influence requires no explanation because it is everywhere, on runways, on social media, in pop culture, in inclusion movements, and every young person who decides their way of being is valid. In the end, her legacy can be summarized in this idea. When a woman dares to be herself, she changes the world without realizing it. Twiggy embodied that truth with a purity that still moves. She imposed nothing. She simply allowed her essence to speak. And that essence, nearly 6 decades later, continues to illuminate fashion, culture, and the lives of millions. Twiggy did not just change the history of global fashion forever. She reminded the world of something fundamental. The most revolutionary beauty is honesty.